Will democracy survive the next couple of years?
And essentially we are the same.
Can't have government choosing winners or losers.
There are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is life illuminated. By Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan. Acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians, a Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology, look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Hello and welcome back to Access to Democracy. I'm Holly Jenkins, your guest host today, and very happy to be here with my state senator, Jim Carlson. So welcome back.
Thank you,
It's
Holly.
nice to have you always. So we're about 3 weeks into this new session, the only state in the country that has a split house, and how are things going?
Not too badly, but I always answer we're still in the minority. It's better than last year, as you well know, and as the voters know.
Yeah.
They turned the House majority over to the Democrats, and the Republicans only have a one-vote majority in the Senate, and so they can feel the pressure now.
Right.
And so it has caused a lot more flexibility, let's say, or a lot more compassionate work between the Democrats and the Senate.
And that's what I was wondering.
Democrats and Republicans in the Senate.
So Minnesotans might see, instead of, do you think that people are going to be digging their heels in at when there's such a slim majority, or will there be an easier path to
Yeah, they did
compromise?
everything before.
Yeah.
So they dug their heels in everything, and they tried to manipulate the public perception. This year it's going to be a lot tougher, because our strategy in some regard is these bills that have to pass, we'll just get them passed in the House. And then the way the process works is the bill comes over to the Senate, and it sits there until the Senate decides to look at it. And what we can do is build up the pressure from the public to say, hey, this bill should be passed.
Right, right. Well, let me start talking about, we have a new governor as well as a new House, a new DFL-controlled House, DFL governor, who really ran on the message of one Minnesota. And a lot of people, I think, that would credit that motto and that idea with his winning strategy. And yet, even though there's support for that concept, there are certain issues that people are just so completely divided on. And I'm going to bring up one of the most controversial is gun control. And right now, and you might be able to elaborate on this, there's a couple of efforts to curb gun violence. First of all, by doing increasing or changing the criminal background checks, and the second is the red flag. So especially the red flag legislation, which seems like most people should accept it, and yet there's still some out there who say that that's an effort to take away their guns. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that is, and how do you respond to those folks who...
First of all, I want to change your perception of it. It's not gun control. It's gun safety.
Gun safety.
Gun safety is the way we term it.
Okay.
And neither of those bills are to take away your possession of a firearm, except if you have one and you're not supposed to have one and someone reports you. So if you become a felon for one reason or another, or you have family violence that by an order for protection or by some other measure, you're not supposed to have a firearm, then your firearm can be taken away. That's the only thing, and that exists today. As far as the red flag law, that is something where a person can even self-identify. I don't feel good right now. I have PTSD. I'm feeling like I could harm my family or myself, and so I think I would like to have my firearm taken into a safe place. Now that's what red flag laws are. They're not to take away the firearm. They are to put it in a place of safety to prevent violence to yourself or someone else in the family. And you can be, there's an application process, and so there can be an emergency order written. It's written by a judge. You take the application to a judge. The judge writes an emergency order, and someone, either police, will come into your place of residence and exercise a search warrant to find the firearm and take it away. Now, that is only temporary because you have to have a hearing to make it permanent. I believe it's 10 days that you have for the hearing in a situation like that. If nobody shows up at the hearing to keep the gun out of your hands, it's automatically returned.
Okay.
If it's an application where they ask for a hearing ahead of time, ahead of confiscating the firearm, where you can voluntarily turn it in. Say, for instance, you have been diagnosed with PTSD and you feel unstable yourself, there can be a hearing where you say yes, and I am under treatment and drug treatment, PTSD treatment, anything like that. The firearm can be taken to a licensed firearms dealer and put into safety storage. As soon as you are back to good health, you can get the gun back.
Okay.
So it's not a confiscation at all.
Nobody's trying to impede on someone's Second Amendment rights.
No, I mean, some people will say that is not due process, which it is, because a judge has to take every step. And they say it's a violation of the Second Amendment, and no, it's not, because the Second Amendment does not protect people who are unsafe from, it doesn't protect them from having their firearms confiscated or surrendered.
Okay, so do you think these have a future? Is this kind of the common ground, possibly? Is there a common ground in helping to, and I agree that it's gun safety, it's
yes,
it's,
The other one is the background check,
yes,
and that's the one where, some people call them gun shows, but there's no show there. This is a flea market for guns, and only a federal firearms dealer, a licensed federal firearms dealer, can sell you a firearm, but they have to go through a background check. They have to. At these gun markets, the amateurs don't have to do that. And in fact, there's been many stories that they don't even ask the age, they don't ask where you are, who you are, what your citizenship is, anything like that, and they sell firearms. Now that's what we want to stop, is that, and that's like the Columbine shooters. They got their guns at a gun market, and there's been several others. The people who bought them, like for Parkland and for Sandy Hook, they got theirs through a firearms dealer. But both of those, everyone knows that there's lots of stories about those shooters were not stable. And this is where that, both of those people did say that they wanted to shoot somebody, they wanted to do something big, and they're copycats. And someone could have had their firearms confiscated and put into a safe place until they were treated.
okay.
So that's the way that would have worked there. And as far as both of those initiatives, both of them have bipartisan support. And in the fact of background checks, it's 90% support in Minnesota. And it's like even NRA members say 85% support.
Okay.
So it's widespread support.
It's one of the interesting things coming up that I've seen more of is, in addition to the NRA, there are other gun advocacy groups that are coming out that have, in some cases, even a stronger pro-gun position than the NRA. And is that wreaking havoc on some of this? It's one thing to take on the NRA, it's another to have these other groups coming in that we really don't know much about them, but they're spreading a certain message.
Yeah, there's one that has been active called the Minnesota Gun Rights, And they're the ones that were centered in Iowa.
Okay.
And they were lying about their origin and what they did. And even the NRA came out against them.
Okay.
They said, these guys are crazy.
So if
We
people
don't
are-
want anything to do with it.
If you're hearing from them, just disregard
Yep.
that message because
And-
it's really.
Yeah, and they actually came in during the last election and sent out literature against me. And they sent out a survey which was so off the wall that I didn't even bother answering it. And they used that non-answer against me. And you can do a favor for yourself if you like YouTube. Go onto YouTube and search for, in the search field, Minnesota gun rights, Jim Carlson.
Okay.
And you will see a YouTube that's just under 2 minutes long that Minnesota Gun Rights put together and blames me for 9/11. They blame me for everything.
Oh my goodness. Well,
So-
I did hear that in one social media post that it was the DFLers that set up the Parkland shooting so that they
Oh,
could
yes. Yep.
push through gun legislation.
Yep.
And when people are starting to say things like that, it's escalated far beyond
Yeah, and
any
that's where it's
rational-
important to research back, because that, the setup, that Parkland was a setup, was a dream of the guy named Alex Jones, who has the radio show, and he also does podcasts too. And he came up with that, and he has since actually apologized for that. But that doesn't make all the people who believed him at the time, they haven't gotten the message yet. So they still say that it was set up. And there's the same people that talk about the moonshots being fake.
Oh, always. Well, we are sadly coming up on the 1-year anniversary, I believe, of Parkland, and I'm sure this will come up plenty in the media again, so hopefully our legislation, divided or not, will come to some common ground and make some
That's right. Yeah.
gun safety changes, just for the sake of curbing gun violence, not for any other reason.
Yeah, that's, and it comes up on February 14th. It was Valentine's
Yeah.
Day.
Oh, yeah.
And there are some Parkland students that are going to come up to visit Minnesota. I don't know if it's that day or if it's plus or minus a couple of days. But you have to remember that it is the students that have pushed that issue. They're the ones that are pushing the red flag law, and in fact, in Florida, they passed it.
Did they?
And they are also pushing the wider criminal background checks. And so it's children that want it for children. And there's some people that say, oh, we should protect our children by arming teachers or things like that. And no.
We're in a whole new era of younger generation becoming engaged and involved and seeing how to influence the process and the policies. So that's a good thing. And if there's anything good to come out of this, that might be it.
Yeah, I'm hoping people do really research things well. I met one of the Sandy Hook mothers. I've talked with the Sandy Hook kids when they came up last year to the Capitol, and one of their coaches. They have a hockey team. So their hockey team came up and came to the Capitol. And I've talked with the coach, and I talked with several of the students too.
Yeah, it's devastating.
Yeah.
Another area that you're fully engaged with for several years, that you've led the way on another safety initiative for Minnesotans, is the hands-free cell phone bill.
Yes.
And I want to just say, first of all, on behalf of Minnesotans in general, thank you for all the work you've put in so many years striving to get this bill. It came so close to passing last year and then just didn't get that final vote. What's confusing this year, a bill is moving along. However, there's two bills moving along. One's moving faster, that one doesn't have your name on it. We're hearing about that one in the news. Do you want to clarify for folks where this all
This is one of the
sits?
things that makes people not like politics.
Yeah, I think so.
I had that bill, I was a co-sponsor in 2008. And then every biennium since
10 years,
then,
yeah.
I've been the main sponsor. Until this year. Now, last year, a lot of the legislature, and actually prior years, it took a little while for people to realize what a threat this is. Even back in, let's say 2009, 2013, there wasn't a broad support for it. But now it's gotten more and more. And we have 23 agencies and unions and corporations that have endorsed it. And they're actually telling their employees, don't use a cell phone while driving for our company. And so it's gotten real popular. Last year, I'm sure it would have passed had we brought it up for a vote. And because we were in the minority, they didn't want to bring up a bill that a minority senator had sponsored. I mean, that's one of the things about politics. So this year, and in fact, I even offered to turn it over to a Republican, and that was not quite good enough because they knew that I was the big sponsor on it. And so this year, the chair of the Transportation Committee, Transportation and Public Safety, that's where it actually gets heard. That's where it's in that section of law. So the chair of the Transportation Committee took the bill and put his name on it and got 4 more Republicans to sign on, so I was aced out of it. But now, I've always said it's better to save lives than it is to get credit. So I'm okay with that. I support it. I've even supported it in the committees that this is the right thing to do to get this bill through. Now, to kind of overcome a little bit of the sting of not being on the bill, I've introduced what they call a clone bill. A clone bill is where if you get a lot of people that want to be on a bill, and in the Senate we can only have 5 people on each bill, you can introduce a clone bill that supports the original bill, has the same language, it's a copycat, it's all that. So I introduced that. So I can still say that I'm sponsoring that bill. So there's still some truth to it.
Yes.
And in the House, we have a lot of people that have signed on to the companion to my clone. The companion to the original bill is already full. That gets 36 signatures. So Sandy Mason is carrying the companion to my clone.
Fill up. Well, and I would agree what what you're saying about the getting the job done is what's most important.
Yes.
But wouldn't it have been better even from the public's perspective if it could have been your name on there as well? You're the one that's put all this work into it. A lot of people have, I'm sure, but just for the sake of transparency, I think that's something most people would rather be truthful on who's put the time and work and effort.
Our present majority doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, and so even with the slim majority, and
I have to have my reward in heaven.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm going to wait for.
Your constituents and others who know you are all appreciative, and anyone who really digs into this, like you said, you got to dig into things, but they'll find out.
A lot of those bills I've carried,
so
the child safety seat. I carried a gross misdemeanor on distracted driving. I carried the seat. Primary seatbelt. I've carried a bunch of other bills that dealing with traffic.
Yeah, and you just want these things to move forward, save lives, instead of playing politics and waiting too long and losing more lives needlessly.
And there's more to do.
It doesn't make any sense.
There's more to do. One of the problems that we've had, if anybody has watched Channel 11, they've given a couple of reports on instances where people have been killed, but the investigation was faulty, where they did not take a blood sample, they did not take the phone for analysis, or they didn't do a drug evaluation. And so later they found out this person had drugs in their system. And they found that out in the hospital. The hospital can tell you, but that's not admissible in court. And if you watch Law and Order, you know that you always have to have that chain of custody of the evidence. So you have to have a licensed person draw the blood. They have to put it into a safe. You can't just pee in a cup and put it in the little doorway and turn it, because that suddenly it's not in custody anymore.
So if people want to figure out how this all happens, should they be watching Law and Order?
It helps. It
wouldn't hurt.
They usually deal with murders. But
the Hand Street bill, you're on the Transportation Finance and Policy Committee, and so you'll hear these bills and it'll go through you. Any other, there's an awful lot of transportation talk on just the funding gaps. Do you have any specific policies that you are supporting, or?
I don't want to divulge anything too soon, but yes, we will have a package that is going to be written by the Democrats on the Transportation Committee, and Frank Hornstein is the chair of the committee in the House. And so we're going to have a bill that Scott Dibble, the ranking member on the Transportation Committee, is going to co-sponsor with Frank Hornstein in the House. So yes, we will have something. You can't divulge it
a little bit?
No.
Okay.
That's something that it's not settled completely yet, and we have, what we need to do is we need to get the bill drafted, figure out how much money we need, how much money we can get from it, where it gets directed, and then you take it to the governor to find out if this is something that he'll sign. If you remember, the new MnDOT commissioner is Margaret Anderson Kelleher, and she is absolutely devoted to bringing in more funding to transportation.
Okay.
She's the one that led the 2008 override of Governor Pawlenty.
So how it's going to happen, we don't know yet,
No,
but
we don't know
everyone is agreeing that it needs to happen, and not just for the transportation for roads and bridges, but for transit. And
maybe everything. There
Yeah.
might be, you know, broad-based, and you know, the chambers of commerce now. The Minnesota Chamber has not really come aboard yet, but we have the Minneapolis Chamber and the St. Paul Chamber, and even right here, the Dakota County Regional Chamber. They're all on board. They're recognizing that our lack of investment in roads and bridges is now hurting business.
well, and I think the number that's floating around for Dakota County is a $400 million deficit in, I don't know if it's unfunded
You can pick any
infrastructure.
number.
It's just
Yeah.
outrageous.
Yeah.
Needs to be addressed because it's not going to get better by
We're
itself.
missing
so,
about, in statewide, we're missing $600 million a year.
Yeah.
Without building anything new.
That's
Yeah.
a fair gap there to make
Right.
up. Another committee that you sit on, and this is a mouthful, the State Government Finance and Policy and Elections Committee.
Yes.
And part of that is relevant to your desire, to your interest in voter access.
Yes.
And you've introduced a couple of bills in that committee, and if you want to talk about those at all, how they're going to
Yeah, we're
help the voters.
I'm real strong on getting voter access, and you know, I oppose these efforts to suppress voters, and there's several things that I want to make sure that we pay attention to, like the you know, convicted felons when they get out, to allow them to vote.
Okay.
We hear that all the time, that number one, people don't know when their right to vote is restored, and they don't realize that you have to be off paper. That means no probation and no parole. And with a lot of states, and I think it's in the high teens or 20s of states that allow people, when they walk out of prison, that they are now restored enough to vote.
Okay.
And that's something that, you know, when we talk about prison being a rehabilitation, it should be something where you're rehabilitated as a citizen and not continued to be punished.
Right.
Today, on well, actually, that's a good thing to look at, is the what's called Almanac at the Capitol. You can get that on some demand, like on a Comcast on demand.
Okay.
But there was a story of a fellow who was actually writing the time cards for people, for contractors for the state. And what he was doing was rounding numbers up and down. And he found out that when that reached more than $500, that they claimed he was cheating the state. And actually he wasn't, because it was rounding off to nothing. That was a felony.
Oh.
So they convicted him of a felony, and now he can't vote.
Okay.
And he's, you know, he's a citizen, longtime citizen, and now he can't vote because of something that was his misunderstanding, his doing something that he thought was reasonable.
Right.
And now he was convicted of it.
Is your punishment
Yeah.
equal to crime?
Right,
In this case,
yeah.
it doesn't sound like it. What are some of the opposing views on that for folks who don't support this idea?
Well, there's a group called Minnesota Voters Alliance that is a group that was formed a long time ago. Their basis in, I'm not sure what, but that they object to all of this. They object to a bill that I've carried a couple of times before, and this is to pre-register 16-year-olds.
Okay.
16 is when you get your driver's license. So why not have them also register? And that doesn't mean they can vote. All that means is you're pre-registered, which you can do today. If you're going to be 18 by the next election, like 18 by next November, not this coming November, the one after, you can actually register right now.
Okay.
And you're held in a, let's say an abeyance here. You don't show up on voter rolls until you turn 18. And then when you go to vote, you're already on that list to vote. I would like to have that done at 16,
Okay.
because 16 is when most kids get their driver's license.
Sure, and it could just be as simple as when you go to apply for your driver's license,
Sure.
you're also applying to register to vote. It doesn't mean you have voting rights at that point, which
right.
maybe they should, because
And
things
today, when an adult, a person over 18, goes to change their driver's license address, there's a little box off on the side that you can check if you want to be registered.
Okay.
And so that's called an opt-in system. And we would like to have it as an opt-out system where you're automatically registered unless you really don't want to be registered. Some
Yeah.
people don't want to be
Right.
registered.
Well, and that would save a lot of confusion, and I would think a lot of paperwork processing for people who are trying to register to vote. It's already
Yes.
taken care of all at one time, instead of all these different layers
Right.
and processes.
And
So-
with that Restore the Vote, that saves an awful lot of prosecutor time, because sometimes these people are not eligible to vote. And when the Secretary of State does their run through, and what they do is they compare the felon releases to the people who voted, and they find out that somebody has voted. And they have to turn that over to the counties and have it prosecuted. And usually the county finds out that this person just didn't understand, so they didn't intentionally vote.
Right, okay.
And that's the felony, is intentionally voted when you're not eligible. So it would make it a lot simpler. And by the way, there are lots of states that allow you to vote when you're out of prison. It's
Okay.
that simple.
Okay. Voting is only step one in community engagement in the public process. People, to really be able to follow along with their elected officials, hold them accountable, know what happened between different elections, they need to follow the legislative process. For some of the bills you're carrying or other things you're doing, what is the easiest way for people to participate?
Well, what I always
that's a
tell
loaded question,
people
but-
is that, and yeah, you're leading me into that website. If you want to dig into anything, the easiest way to dig in, easiest way to open, it's kind of like looking through a peek hole into another universe. And that's to go to Senate.mn.
There it is.
Senate.mn. And you will see at the top of the page there'll be House and Senate and bills and media. If you want to watch, and I caution you that watching these hearings is addicting. So once you watch
It
one, you're
actually
going
is.
to want to watch a lot more.
I can attest to that.
So watch it, if you find out a bill that you're interested in, and you say you want to find out a bill, say you want to find out about a gun bill or a child safety bill or senior bill, you can go on that Senate.mn, and down a little ways it says bill search. And you click on that, and you can actually search for a key word, and it'll bring up the bills that have that word in it.
Yeah.
And now you can look at that bill and you can see what the plans are for that bill.
I would encourage people, anybody who hasn't done this before, just pick one of your topics, your favorite topics, and follow that committee. You can see them online, and it is addictive, but it's
Yep.
okay to take a break from Netflix every once in a while.
Yeah.
So we are out of time. This
Oh,
went very
gosh.
quickly, and I want to thank you so much, and I hope we'll see you again soon.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Great interview,
Thanks.
Holly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.